Today, we're going to talk about something a lot of us might feel, but maybe can't quite put a name to. That sense of growing up just a little too fast. We're going to dive into the psychology of what's known as the accelerated child.
Have you ever been called an old soul? Or maybe you were the kid who always heard, "Wow, you're so mature for your age." And on the surface, that sounds like a great compliment, doesn't it? But what if it's pointing to something deeper? You know, a childhood that was maybe a little less about just being a kid and a lot more about handling pressure.
This really brings to mind a powerful quote from the psychoanalyst Carl Jung. He said, "The heaviest burden for a child is the unlived life of its parents." And that idea that sometimes the weight we carry as kids isn't even ours to begin with, well, that's really at the heart of what we're exploring today.
Okay, so let's get into it. What is an accelerated child, really? Because it's more than just a label, right? It actually points to a fundamental shift, a totally different experience of what childhood is supposed to be.
So here's the core definition. It's a young person who has to take on adult roles, responsibilities, and emotional burdens way too early. And that word prematurely is everything. They end up bypassing key stages of just being a kid. We're not talking about learning to wash the dishes here. We're talking about carrying heavy, adult-level emotional weight way before you have the tools to even understand it, let alone handle it.
And this is such a critical distinction to make, because they can look similar from the outside. On one hand, you've got healthy maturity. That's something that develops slowly, over time. It helps build confidence. But then you have this forced responsibility. That's sudden. It's imposed. It's tied to adult worries. And instead of confidence, it just creates a ton of anxiety. One is natural growth. The other, honestly, is a burden.
So that brings up a big question. Where does this all start? How does this happen? Well, more often than not, the roots of this experience are found right inside the family environment.
In fact, psychologists have a specific word for this phenomenon. It's called parentification. And it's basically what it sounds like, a complete role reversal where the child ends up having to be the caregiver or the emotional support for the parent instead of, the other way around.
So what does that actually look like in day-to-day life? Well, it could be the child who becomes the family's main confidant, the one who has to listen to all the adult problems. Or maybe they're the mediator, trying to keep the peace between their parents. It can also mean managing things like finances, or taking on so much care for younger siblings that it's way beyond what's normal or healthy.
Now, it's not always parentification, to be clear. Other things can trigger this too. Think about a major family crisis, like a serious illness or sudden financial trouble. Or even just growing up in a super high-pressure, high-achieving environment. All of those things can unfortunately accelerate a childhood in very similar ways.
Okay, so what are the actual signs to look for back in childhood? What does this little adult really act like?
One of the biggest, most common signs is an intense fear of making mistakes. I mean, think about it. If you feel like you're responsible for adult-sized problems, then any little mistake feels absolutely catastrophic. So perfectionism isn't just a personality trait, it becomes a survival strategy. And hang on to that thought, because we're going to see how this plays out in adulthood in just a bit.
You might also see other things, like a kid who's just overly serious all the time. They might seem really uncomfortable with unstructured playtime, like they don't know what to do if there aren't rules or a goal. This often leads to this compulsive need to be the good kid or the helpful one, just to feel safe and valued. And as you can imagine, that makes it pretty hard to just relax and connect with other kids.
All right, now this is where everything really clicks into place. Because those patterns we build in childhood, they don't just magically disappear when we turn 18. Nope, they echo. And they can create some really significant challenges for us as adults.
Get this number, 70%. According to one study, 70% of adults who report dealing with chronic burnout also strongly identify with these experiences of growing up way too fast. That connection is it's incredibly powerful.
And remember what we said about that childhood fear of making mistakes? Well, here's the echo. As an adult, that perfectionism can morph into crippling procrastination. You become so afraid of not doing something perfectly that you just don't do it at all. And that cycle, as you can probably guess, is a fast track to total burnout. The long-term impacts here are pretty profound. I mean, if you spent your whole childhood being responsible for other people's feelings, you probably never learned how to relax or set your own boundaries. If you were always praised for being the caretaker, you might feel kind of lost. Like, who even are you outside of that role? This can lead to all sorts of things: chronic anxiety, trouble with trust and intimacy, and this nagging feeling that you're somehow responsible for everyone and everything around you.
So, okay, after hearing all that, what's the path forward? The good news is it's not about blaming your parents or trying to pretend the past didn't happen. It's really about self-understanding, self-compassion, and a gentle redirection.
And look, this isn't a quick fix checklist, it's more of a path. It really starts with just acknowledging your experience without any blame. From there, it's about allowing yourself to maybe grieve the parts of childhood that you missed out on. And then, the really cool part, you get to rediscover play and spontaneity. And, so importantly, you start practicing setting healthy boundaries. Learning that saying no isn't selfish, it's actually a vital act of self-care.
And really, this is the whole point. The goal isn't to erase the past. You can't, but you can understand its echo in the present. And once you understand it, you get to choose a different future. You get the power back. It's about reclaiming your own life on your own terms.
So, let's just leave you with this one final thought to ponder. If you could go back and speak to that younger version of you, that little adult, what is the one thing they most need to hear from you today?